It's almost exactly a year since this now infamous protest against the Royal Anglians. These soldiers were returning from a tour of Iraq, but the extremist view of the Afghan war is pretty much the same.
Almost all the Muslims are against the war in Afghanistan, but how are you going to respond?
Qadir Baksh has been trying to re-educate the extremists for more than a decade.
It's creating racial tensions, it's separating the Muslims from the non-Muslims, it's causing Islamophobia as well. And all this is because of the ill feeling, the hatred that's building up. The BNP, you know, or the National Front, in the old days used to be against anybody black. And now it's like anybody who's Muslim.
When Islam for UK threatened to march in Wootton Bassett, Muslims back in Luton said they would protest against them. Asim used to live there and has witnessed the funeral processions.
If you were to criticise the war, you're seen as being anti-soldiers. The government knows they shouldn't be there, and they're using the soldiers as almost as a smokescreen, as a ploy to get the British people behind them.
This is the Army Recruitment Office for Bedfordshire, literally the first building as you enter Bury Park. But despite its convenience, it's largely untroubled by local youths, many of whom lined up outside to fight a more immediate enemy. Members of far-right extremist groups, some of whom have attacked people here and had to be banned from marching in the area. In the backlash, many won't voice their views. Those who do say they're not listened to. This group have won awards for their work to stop the radicalisation of young Muslims, but say they can no longer work with the government to prevent extremism.
The images that young Muslims see on TV day in and day out from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from other places around the world have a really deep impact on those young Muslims and make them more vulnerable to extremism. So without acknowledging the impact of foreign policy, you're ignoring a critical factor as to why young people turn to extremism.
Nikki Jenkins reporting. Well, Fozia is here with us. We heard you there saying it's no point running these schemes anymore, and you've actually gone as far as turning down government funding. Why is that?
Well, there are two main reasons why we feel that we can't apply for funding anymore. The first is we feel that the Preventing Violent Extremism agenda has actually been counterproductive. It's damaged community relations and it's actually stigmatised the Muslim community. And secondly, we feel that the PVE agenda doesn't take into account the complexity of reasons as to why young Muslims turn to extremism, and in particular, the motivating factor of foreign policy.
Bill Rammell, very strong opinions there. What they're saying, basically, is your policy in Afghanistan is having the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve. It's actually pushing people towards extremism.
Well, what I think we've got to do very clearly is get the facts across. This is not a war against Islam.
Absolutely.
A majority of people across this planet who've been killed by al-Qaeda-associated terrorism and attacks on Muslims.
Absolutely.
When the Taliban are planting their roadside explosives, they are just as often targeting ordinary Afghan Muslims as they are our troops and the troops of other nations. We've really got to get that argument across, and we've got to make clear...
But that's the point, isn't it? You're not getting that argument across, and that's what the young Muslims in this region are feeling disenfranchised because of it.
Absolutely, and I recognise that we need to do more. I and other government ministers spend a lot of time trying to get these arguments across. We've got to make clear there's a fundamental divide between the vast majority of people in this country, including the vast majority of Muslims, who oppose violence, and that very small minority who are advocating killing and murder to advance a political cause.
Let me just go to Inayat Bunglawala, because you have heard what the Minister said there. What does the government need to do you think?
Well, first of all, look, let's make clear what our initial goal was. We were going to go there to defeat terrorism, defeat the bases that Taliban were providing to al-Qaeda. What happened is we intervened in a civil war over there. That Taliban were not some outsiders. They were part of the population. They are a major part of the Pashtun population. We intervened in the losing side, actually, in Afghanistan. We backed the side that was losing against the Taliban. Now we're stuck there. We're stuck against a very hostile population that sees us as occupiers. We did.
That's not true. I want to hear from Inayat what people here feel and what should be done to change that.
Well, we did exactly what al-Qaeda wanted us to do. We gave the impression perception that we are at war with a Muslim country now. And that is what is causing this disenchantment amongst young Muslims. They see us, our country, our troops, going into another country, a Muslim majority country, and every day civilians are dying. And they're saying, why are we participating in something that is killing civilians over there? There must be another strategy out there to defeat Al-Qaeda.
So and you think a different strategy is needed. Bob Russell, very briefly.
There has to not only political leadership, there has to be community leadership, and communities have to show leadership with their own communities. Why is it that the political leaders in Helmand Province I met, the political leaders, support us, and then we are told people back here don't? I think they should have a conversation with the community leaders out in Helmand Province, because they want you to support them, because they know the alternative is the return of Taliban, and bad news for females.
Bernard Jenkins.
Well, I'm picking up this point and almost agreeing 100% with Inya, actually, that, you know, what we call Taliban is actually a very broad spectrum. And we went in there and we bracketed all the Taliban together and started fighting them. Most of the Taliban that British soldiers have been killing in Helmand are local farmers who are paid $10 a day by the bad people. And yet, every time we kill an ordinary Taliban soldier who doesn't go back to his family farm, we create more enemies for our soldiers. And that's what we've done. We've actually written the narrative for Al-Qaeda to transmit back to the population in our own country. But I think that's what we've learned now. I think General McChrystal, by making it absolutely clear right through the command chain, and I saw this when I was in Afghanistan myself, the whole purpose of the Allied armed forces, the Americans, the British being there now, is to protect the civilian population. Yes. And there was a dramatic fall in the number of civilian casualties as a result of this. I mean, there still will be some, but I think there is a chance we can now begin to win over the moderate Taliban in places like Helmand. I have to tell you, that poll of the popularity of the British Armed Forces in Afghanistan, I think, is highly suspect. Well,
what I want to find out about is what people here feel about it. And we've got Imran Chowdhury, who's a Muslim student. What's your opinion?
I think we have to really question the effectiveness of this war. I mean, we went into this war headlong without really thinking or analysing the situation we were in. And I think we very much underestimated the war in Afghanistan and the Taliban. And it's been a decade now, and I don't think, obviously, we haven't accomplished the task that we went out there to set to do. And winning the hearts and minds of the Afghan people, I think, now obviously is the main objective. Yes. And I think it's a shame now that we're thinking like this, because it's been nearly a decade now, as I've said, and we should have done this way back.
Alan McClure, behind you, your nephew was very sadly killed in Afghanistan, serving in a friendly fire incident, in fact. But what do you think about when you hear people here talking about how they feel about the war? What do you feel as someone who's been directly affected?
Well, it's quite a large debate. You know, one side of me and my sister's family say, bring the boys out. But on the other hand, everyone who's been killed, not just the British, but also the Afghani people, we're letting them down as well. Their lives would have gone in vain, you know. We've made a lot of mistakes, as the politicians have said. And they're now talking about winning hearts and minds, and they need to do that back home as well, because we need to be supporting the troops. It doesn't matter if we agree with the war, we need to be supporting the boys who are actually out there.
Alan McClure, thank you very much. Well, one final question to our panel. As part of our poll, we asked people whether British forces would still be needed in Afghanistan in large numbers in 5 years' time. 50% said yes, they would. So a quick response, and I mean quick, from all our panel. Bill Rammell, will we still be there in large numbers in 55 years' time? I
want our troops to come home as quickly as it's safe to do so. We're starting this year the district-by-district transfer of responsibility for security. If we make progress by 2014, the majority of Afghanistan can be controlled by the Afghanis.
Bernard Jenkins.
We couldn't sustain this level of commitment for 5 years. I suspect our troop levels will reduce substantially within the next 1 to 2 years, and we'll be concentrating far more on training and mentoring rather than fighting.
Bob?
If you saw the garrison buildings at Camp Bastion, this government and a successive government are looking for more than 5 years.
Well, if we're insisting on protecting this government of Hamid Karzai, which is a deeply corrupt government, we'll be there for a very, very long time, unfortunately.
I'd like to say thank you very much to our panel and to our audience. That's all from us in Colchester tonight. Good night.